Get ready to enter a brave new world with your host, Vasant Dar.
Brave New World is supported by the Center for Data Science, or CDS, at NYU. If your organization is interested in engaging with CDS through student projects, please email cdsindustry@nyu.edu. For more color on the podcast and additional commentary, please subscribe to our newsletter at vasantdar.substack.com.
Hello, and welcome to Brave New World. My guest today is Ben Shneiderman, Professor Emeritus from the University of Maryland. Ben was one of the early PhDs in computer science and has been a pioneer in creating the field of human-computer interaction, which is about designing computer interfaces to enhance human performance, unlike the primary focus of AI, which has been to make machines themselves more intelligent. Ben, welcome to Brave New World. I am delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you, Vasant. Great to be here.
So usually I start by asking people to say something about themselves, but I'm going to take a slightly different approach with you on that. I like to take advantage of people who've been around in the field for a long time to talk a little bit about the history of the field. So I'm going to take full advantage of that, given that you were one of the first PhDs in computer science. So I was looking at your personal epilogue from your human-centered AI book, and there were several parts there that intrigued me. There was one piece where you say that, you wrote something for your magazine, for the City College of New York, that you wrote an article on AI and neural networks. When was that, and what did you say?
And at City College in New York, a wonderful institution, I was a physics and math major. There was no computer science, but I had the good fortune to take 2 courses in computing from the astounding man, Richard Hamming, winner of the Turing Award, known for Hamming codes and many other things. And that was a great course. I worked for some physicists for 2 years, and so I was very swept up in the whole world of computing. And I wrote an article for the City College Engineering magazine called Vector about artificial intelligence in 1968. So it's interesting to go back and see what I said then. I had a mixed bag of ideas about AI, and I think I've continued the same philosophy of seeing what's really impressive, but being concerned about what I disapproved of.
Do you still have that article? Do you have a copy of it?
I have an online copy. I have an electronic. I made an electronic copy.
So do you remember what you said back in 1968? It's always fun reading, what one writes 10, 20, 30, 40 years later.
Wow. Well, I could actually look for it. Should I take the time to bring it up?
Sure. Go ahead. I'm very curious.
January 1968. All right. The development of high-speed computers has led men to consider the possibility of duplication or simulation of human thought processes by machine. The complexities are enormous, potential results intriguing, and possibilities thought-provoking. Mental drudgery could be eliminated, but man might have to contend with being whose intelligence is superior to his own. So you can see the old style of writing with male pronouns only,
yes.
Which swept in memorably in the mid-'70s, but this was before that. And so it goes on for 4 or 5 pages about all of these things, and the conclusion. And do they think? Is it a tool or a being? Well, there we are, still talking about that. The only question left is that of computer consciousness. Some critics claim that thinking can occur only in conscious systems. Since computers are not aware of what they do, not realizing the implications of their actions, and having no emotions, they do not think. This argument cannot be contradicted. Computers are not conscious. But why must consciousness be a prerequisite for thinking? And so it goes. For the near future, the computer can be viewed as a tool for human use, just as the shovel or bulldozer are extensions of the hand and repeatedly and greatly improve man's ability. So can the computer be considered an extension of the brain, coupling the creativity, imagination, and adaptability of man and the speed, accuracy, and memory of the computer is probably the best way to make use of this newest tool. How's that?
That's pretty amazing, Ben. I mean, I would be proud if I had written something like that 50 years ago. That is truly amazing. And in that same paragraph where you referred to this article, You said that you were going to go study with Newell and Simon, but that plan was thwarted because of the war. And
Yes.
I can't sort of help but ask myself whether that was a serendipitous thing, because working with Newell and Simon might have taken you in a completely different direction than the one you took.
Absolutely, yes. As I graduated in 1968, the Vietnam War was on, and drafting of graduates was a real possibility. While Carnegie Mellon University gave me a very generous fellowship to study with Newell and Simon, and I visited and met them, and as well as Alan Perlis, the head of department, very impressive people, very inspirational, and paid my dues. But ultimately, I had to withdraw the application, and I wound up teaching at a 2-year college, which was my national service for 3 years, and that's how I came. The 2-year college was on Long Island outside New York, and so I wound up taking courses at Stony Brook. And as you said, I became the first PhD in computer science at the State University of New York, Stony Brook. So that was great. So yes, I missed the chance to be with Newell and Simon. I might have been swept up into their world of AI, but as you know, I became something of a critic, and maybe not just a critic, but a commentator on the scene, and felt there were stronger possibilities in understanding human performance, and human-computer interaction was my chosen direction. And I began to be 20% of an experimental psychologist in studying the way people used computers, especially through programming. And so that led to my early book in 1980 called Software Psychology, a far-out idea which this publisher took, and it became a selection of the 2 computer science book of the month clubs. And so it suddenly was a hot topic, and that was a great satisfaction to me. And it was further satisfaction in 1985, I think. Alan Newell did the keynote talk at the ACM Chi Computer Human Interaction Conference. And in that, he cites my book. So how do you like that? Shows a picture of the cover. So there I was, my hero turns around and says something kind about my work. That was one of my memorable personal histories.
I can imagine. And, Simon, of course, was a mentor to me, 10 years later, and had a huge influence and impact on my life. But let's just go back to, that time, because I saw this interview by John Markov, who was interviewing Raj Reddy after Raj won the Turing Award. I forget what year it was. And, they were talking about the history of AI. And Raj Reddy said something that made me realize that sort of AI, or rather, I don't know whether AI or computing, just sort of bifurcated, I guess, in the late 60s, and here's a quote from Raj. He said, what Doug Engelbart was showing was a very powerful vision of how human-computer collaboration could happen, how people could do things with the use of computers, whereas the AI lab, and he's referring to Minsky, Newell, Simon, Perlis, was primarily thinking about what a computer can do, not what a human and a computer can do. So Did the field sort of bifurcate, in that way? Like, why was there's this sort of need for a bifurcation? I mean, aren't those two things really complementary? Like, human plus computer?
Yes, I would think so. I agree with you. It is troubling to me that it has, and I would say those who believed in making machines that were intelligent, maybe conscious, but those who favored simulating human thought, Minsky particularly strong, and Minsky and I were keynotes at a conference on creativity in the early 90s, and we had a memorable dinner discussion over that. And he was firmly opposed to using his ideas as tools. They were only meant to simulate human behavior. That was the only goal that was on his agenda. So many had these strong viewpoints and resisted what Doug Engelbart was was promoting in a good way as early as 1968. And so I became a devotee of Engelbart later on. I didn't know about his 68 demo at the time, but later, and I helped arrange for his receiving award from SIG Chi for his contributions in 98, I believe. And he visited me at University of Maryland, and we had a very nice relationship. He was quite a interesting, very sympathetic, very emotional man, and made important contributions. Absolutely.
Yeah, he did indeed. I mean, that was a hell of a demo. I mean, I guess they call it the mother of all demos, way back in 1968. So I went and asked ChatGPT, in preparation for our conversation, I asked ChatGPT about, what is this area of human-computer interaction, and, who are the key figures in it? And, it mentioned Engelbart and Alan Kay. And then it said that Ben Shneiderman actually is sort of, in a sense, the father of HCI, that you kind of created the field. And, Engelbart was kind of more of an engineer, and you took it and sort of created sort of some psychological foundations, or gave the field some psychological foundations. So talk about that. Like, who were the people who influenced you sort of early in your career?
How can I not like ChatGPT after that kind?
There you
kind
go.
comment?
There you go. Yeah, that's not an hallucination, is it?
Right. Well, no, that's very kind. Alan Kay, of course, and Doug Engelbart were both very influential figures. I'm pleased that maybe the record shows that I helped. They did these important works, but I did help create the discipline, the field, as you call it, and understood very carefully the importance of arranging a conference. So I, with Bill Curtis, started in 1982 the conference. It was called Human Factors in Computing Systems, which became the SIG Chi conference the following year. And that, we originally hoped to bring 200 or 300 people together, but 906 showed up, which was pretty startling in 1982. And it's grown. And in April of this year, more than 5,000 people sold out the conference in Yokohama, Japan. So, yes, it's grown, and I have great satisfaction in seeing not just the conferences, but the journals and the books and the curricula. And it's become an established field within computer science. And of course, I think you can appreciate I had struggles in its early days to make this topic stick as part of computer science. The idea of psychology and doing experiments on people was seen as rather far out. And memorably, one of my colleagues says, "Ben is such a smart guy. What's he doing this HCI work?" I had started in my career in doing database and published there to establish my credentials, but I was quite devoted to the psychological aspects. And as I said, in 1980, the book on software psychology. And by 1986-7, the book on designing the user interface became my calling card, which has gone on to 6 editions and has remained a stable book as central to the topic. So I did contribute a variety of things, from textbooks to teaching and advocacy and speaking. I was giving 30 to 40 public talks a year about the topic. And so yes, I'm pleased that the record seems to show I created it. Maybe I would say, to feature among that, the important contribution was the notion of direct manipulation. It was an encompassing framework which took into account Alan Kay's work as well as Engelbart. And I made the kind of leap to understand what it was that was attractive about it. It was the visual representation of the world of action on the screen, the objects and the actions, the files, file icons and the folder icons, and then the trash bin icon to represent the deletion. And so you would drag a file to the trash can. And so that idea of direct manipulation, visual representation, rapid incremental and reversible operations, you could drag or undrag or open the trash can and take things out, became a second principle. And then selection instead of typing. Keyboard use was the dominant form of using computers, and the shift towards mouse pointing, thanks to Doug Engelbart and others. And eventually we came to become early champions of the touchscreen in the mid-90s and developed various touchable applications, which became the basis for the success story of the phone and other mobile devices. Steve Jobs visited us in October 1988, and I became a consultant for Apple for 5 years, and so those were memorable times.
So say a little more about Steve Jobs. What was that experience like? You said he visited your lab at the University of Maryland.
Yes,
is that right?
He had arranged to come visit, and we had set up various demos. He was already a respected figure, still a young guy, but clearly a leader and a very appealing character. And so we set up a series of demos, and he went through them rather quickly, saying, "That's great, that sucks, that's great, that's great, that sucks." There was nothing else. It was great or it sucked. And so we asked him, why does that suck? What was wrong? And he had an answer. He had an idea. He wasn't always right, but he was firm in his convictions.
And this was what, a few years after the Mac came out?
This was 1988, so the Mac was out early on.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so the Lisa and then the Mac, 84, 5. And so these ideas of direct manipulation, which were written up in 1981, 82, it sort of codified what people were doing, but it clarified what was going on. And it was a theory of why it worked, and it eliminated some of the problems. We could see the flawed designs in Lisa and Max, and so it caught on. Memorably, at a conference after that paper was published, dear colleague Stu Card, working at Xerox PARC, famous researcher, wonderful guy, I see him walking towards me, and he walks up to me, and he doesn't say hello. He just points at me and he says, "You got it." In the sense that he was saying that paper clarified what was going on and made it teachable and made it possible for designers to follow a set of principles that enabled them to more reliably build the kind of successful interfaces that led us to the iPhone and the touchable mobile devices.
So, Ben, I want to go back a little bit to sort of early AI, right? What was, I've read this paper by Minsky. It was a 1961 paper called Steps Towards AI. And then there was an article in Science by Newell, Simon, and Perlis about computer science, and I guess they defined it as a phenomena around computers. What were you most critical about in terms of like the early directions of AI? What was it that bothered you about AI from the start?
As a graduate student, I had the good fortune to be a student of Herbert Gelernter, Herb Gelernter, father of David Gelernter, you may know at Yale University, but Herb was my memorable teacher for recursive function theory, and we also studied AI and Feigenbaum and Feldman's book about computers and thought from 1963. So those were important figures, and Gelernter really led us down to think about these things in a careful way. So I became convinced that the goal of design was to build tools for thought, a phrase that others have used, like Howard Rheingold, but tools for thought, or Steve Jobs said, a bicycle for the mind, cute phrase. And so I was convinced that that was the way forward. It seemed to me the evolution of technology was in that direction. I was quite inspired by, and you asked about the people who inspired me, Louis Mumford, the sociologist, whose 1934 book called Techniques in Civilization had a gift for me in which he talked about the obstacle of animism, how every technology goes through an early phase when it mimics human abilities. And so you create, or animal abilities, so you create planes that flap wings like birds, or you create machines that look like humans and robots. And so that idea is suboptimal. It makes for great entertainment. So Disney audio animatronics are just fine with me. But when you start having humanoid robots walking around, helping elders or guiding people through airports, I begin to laugh. And these ideas seem preposterous to me. Again, influenced by Mumford. And Mumford had an awkward word, which was dissociation. You have to dissociate the task from the human model. And you have to think about, if you need a task done, how would you optimally do it? And he has 30 or 40 examples of how that transition went in different technologies. So I was really taken by that. I was also influenced by Buckminster Fuller and Marshall McLuhan. These were key figures. I went to see McLuhan, and he was influential in my thinking. I was quite eclectic. I had many interests, not just the physics and programming, but philosophy and psychology and poetry and playwriting. So all those different agendas were important to me. Yet I was being told in the university I had to specialize. And McLuhan freed me from that. And his vision of the global electronic village, part of it undermined the linear thinking of print and freed us to be open-ended and nonlinear in the way that hypertext became, but also that this destruction of linearity would destroy specialization, and that I could be a generalist, that was a fruitful direction. So he validated my multiple interests, and I went forward. I came to understand that was not fully correct, that actually you do have to specialize maybe in sequential ways and focus on something and be productive on doing one thing really well. And then you can move to another thing really well. And so I've appreciated the diverse backgrounds I've had in my interests, but I know the value of focusing on one thing at a time.
So Ben, we've both been in the field for a long time, and I'm going to make an admission and ask you, for how you feel about this. And my admission is that I never imagined that I would see AI where it is in my lifetime, right? So as a graduate student, my expectations were quite low of the field, and I guess if you were around in, at that time in the late 70s and 80s, that's not surprising given, what the state of the art of AI was at that time, right? And, one of the things I say in my forthcoming book is that I've been surprised by the success that modern AI seems to have demonstrated, that I never thought that in my lifetime I'd be talking to a machine in English and that it might even quote unquote understand or understand the meaning of what I'm trying to say. Because, I saw dozens, and this is no exaggeration, dozens of dissertations in natural language, supervised by, great people like Roger Shank, many other, luminaries in AI. And those things just crashed and burned, when it came to sort of to the edges of their knowledge, right? That they just sort of disintegrated beyond a certain point, and that they were engineered to function well in well-defined kinds of domains, right? And so to me, that was sort of interfaces as far as AI was concerned. And there was a real need for, what you were doing, which is direct manipulation interfaces, making computers easy to use, because computers were difficult to use, at that time. I still remember bad command or file name coming back at you from the computer, and that was the end of it, right? There was no real way to talk to the computer in our language. You had to talk to the computer in its language. And so one of the things I say is that I'm actually surprised that I'm now able to communicate with the machine in my language, right? That it can now, quote unquote, understand what I'm saying. Are you surprised at what you're seeing now with the state of the art in AI?
That's a great question. Yes, I'm impressed by what I'm seeing now. Startled? My phrase is, it's startlingly impressive, but alarmingly flawed. So I think you have to. There's a tendency to be hyperbolic about AI and its accomplishments. And it's, almost a religious fanaticism of belief in this magical creation. And the language that's used, it thinks, it reads, it understands, it knows, all those words seduce us into thinking that that machine is thinking. But machines are different from people. My fundamental premise, maybe influenced by my humanitarian leanings, is that people are different from machines. And we have to celebrate the remarkable things that people can do. I think I'm equally amazed by the things I see. I'm amazed by Frank Gehry buildings. I'm amazed by artwork. I'm amazed by conceptions that I see people doing. I'm amazed by the growth of the World Wide Web, the spread of e-commerce, the remarkable transition from a time when computers were used by a very thin sliver of people, on the order of millions, to the use of iPhones and smartphones by billions of people. That's the transition that excites me, that startles me. I would not have believed it. Colleague John Thomas from IBM Research in the mid-90s, late 90s, wrote a paper about the million-man social system and social media. That the idea that there would be 1 million people on social media was a startling, unbelievable notion in the mid-90s. And here we are, billions of people using Facebook and other social media. So the startling thing to me is how broad the impact of HCI has been, that the development of these user interfaces, the widespread use of them. And I might note that among the 2 million apps on the iPhone, they're all direct manipulation. I know of no agents or intelligent apps that function. Maybe you do, or you can steer me to some, but the central premise of people being in control, that we want to amplify, augment, enhance, and empower human performance. That's, to me, the central message. The goal is to amplify, augment, enhance, and empower human performance. And we know how to do this. We build users' self-efficacy, we support their creativity, we clarify their responsibility, and we enable social connectedness. Those are the strategies, those are the philosophies. And to me, it's a celebration of humanity, human dignity. And we want to promote social justice and equality and fairness. There's a lot of things that we are doing and advancing through these technologies. Yes, they're flawed. They have brought many problems, and we didn't anticipate all of those either. Jonathan Haidt, your colleague at NYU, has written the book Anxious Generation about the harmful effects of these technologies, and he's leading a movement to provide corrective actions and to have schools limit the use of mobile devices in classrooms and to restrict it to educational purposes. And so we're coming to understand how we need to put limitations. There are certainly problems created by the remarkable success of this vast enterprise of people using computers. I mean, the issues of privacy and cyber criminals and cyber crime, these are the dilemmas of our time.
As you were talking about Jonathan Haidt and social media and all that, I was reminded of this interview between a journalist and Steve Jobs, where Jobs was talking about all these amazing new interfaces and sort of, very visually oriented interfaces. And so at the end of the conversation, journalist asks him, so your kids must be having a great time with these. And Jobs says, no, I don't let my kids use them.
Right.
Do you recall this?
Yes, I do.
Interview?
Sure. And similarly, other leaders in computing have made similar statements, right?
Yeah. But I want to go back a little bit, because you were talking about the fact that all these millions of apps and the direct manipulation interface, which is absolutely right. To follow up on my previous question, I mean, I guess, is it time for these direct manipulation interfaces now to sort of share the world with just natural language interfaces like, Siri, I guess I'd call Siri an agent, right? It's one of the early kind of agents that sort of, quote unquote, talks to you and tries to interpret what you're saying in language. But isn't it sort of, I guess, aren't we sort of approaching a time now where it's just natural to talk to a computer? I mean, I'm not disputing the fact that, direct manipulation interface is wonderful. You have control of the system and they make a lot of sense. And they've really opened up computers to everyone, right? But aren't we sort of approaching the era now where this, making computers available to everyone means we can just talk to them just like we talk to people, even though they're not like us, they don't think like us, they do things differently. But the fact that we can actually just talk to them, isn't that amazing?
Oh, Buzzbud, you've already fallen into Lewis Mumford's trap there, where you believe that computers should be like people. We should be able to talk to them. It's the most natural thing. It's
absolutely not. Absolutely not. Right. So I'm not saying computers should be like people, or that they should even definitely or even potentially do what we do. I'm just saying that. Yeah, and this is sort of following up, from my two questions ago, which is that computers have now learned to talk to us in our language as opposed to us.
Computers learned? What do you mean learned?
I mean, haven't they? I mean, LLMs have basically learned something.
Programmers have implemented. Programmers have made this happen. It's not that the computers were taking action. There's no agency in computers that they don't step forward and learn something. They become reprogrammed. They're just machines with no more intelligence than a wooden pencil or a light bulb. Oh,
well, are we?
dear,
I mean,
are we? You up.
No, what I was going to say is, like, are we nitpicking here, or are we disagreeing on something fundamentally philosophical?
Okay.
Right.
All right. So yeah, we could have an argument over these things, but let's go into be scientists. Let's look at what forms of interaction are successful for which tasks. And so the central questions when you start studying HCI is who are the users, what are the tasks? And then how can you best enable users to accomplish those tasks? So if your goal is your hands are busy, your eyes are busy, you're moving around in your apartment and you want to know what's the weather tonight, it's really easy to say, what's the weather tonight? And Siri will give you an answer, okay? So hands busy, eyes busy, mobility are some of the key factors that favor a voice interface of that kind. But remember, voice interfaces are suboptimal for performance tasks. And so they are not natural and they are not ways of guiding and structuring in use of technologies. We don't have a voice interface for our automobile. We drive the wheel, direct manipulation. We see the world of action in front of us. We turn the wheel slightly to the left. We turn slightly to the right. It would be quite awkward if you steered your car by saying, turn to the left a little, no, not that much, a little bit less, show me this. It would be exhausting. So direct manipulation of automobiles is a very nice
okay, but let me interrupt you there, Ben. I agree. It would be absurd for you to tell the car to turn. Like, it's better for the car to drive itself, isn't it? That it just
under
knows.
Some conditions, yes.
Right? It just knows when to turn, right? So I agree
don't say no about machines. I think it's misleading. Once you start saying no and learns and thinks, you're sucked into a world of unscientific thinking.
But why is that? Like, so let's just push on this a little bit, right? So if I say
Mumford.
But hang on, if I say the computer knows where New York is, what's wrong with that?
I say that also. Sure, in a casual way, that's fine. But when we're talking scientifically, when we're talking an analysis and we're trying to run experiments and evaluate performance, it corrupts our thinking to suggest that machines know or think or understand anything. They're just machines. They're a different category than humans. And using human-like language to describe machines is a fatal categorical error, which results in billions of dollars of loss and many deaths. So Elon Musk says, I see with my eyes, my Teslas will use just cameras, no LiDAR or radar. His engineers disagree with him. He overrides them. And so we have Teslas, which are more error prone because they don't use LiDAR. It's a classic example, one of many. The idea of human-like banking machines. Early on, I worked 50 years ago for Citibank in helping design the early bank terminals. And the idea that the computer would say, "How can I help you?" was alive and well, and still is alive and well, by the way, in some people's minds who still gravitate to this mistaken, misguided approach. So those machines just disappeared. They didn't work. And the labeling of them as automated teller machines. And there were names like Harvey Wallbanker and Tilly the Teller. All those humanoid ideas, Vasant, sunk those applications. And so Citibank had early on 50% greater utilization because it just came up and it had buttons which said cash, deposit, balance. You press cash, you press 60, you get your $60 and you're gone. It's a few clicks, no humanoid fake discussions like that, okay?
Sure. Okay, but let me just push on something here a little bit more, which is, so I'm going to make the case for verbal talking interfaces, right? Somewhere in your work, you refer to the wonderful interfaces we have in digital cameras, right? And I'm just thinking about the digital camera of the future, and I'm thinking I could be looking at my subject, and wouldn't it be wonderful to talk to my camera and tell it, can you just get rid of that pesky power line on the top right of the image? Or can you just enhance the contrast towards the left side of the face? Something like that. Wouldn't that be a wonderful interface for a future digital camera?
You're talking about two different things. A voice-controlled digital camera to take photos as opposed to edit photos. Taking a photo is a different experience. Taking a photo is a relationship between the photographer and the subjects. Okay, so that's a different thing. So speaking to a camera would dramatically interfere with that. I think that would be a real problem to say, take the picture. Now, editing is a somewhat different.
But why? Why would that be an impediment as opposed to a tool, right? That the camera now can. I have access to all of the things I press, I point, and all that kind of stuff. But I can even talk to it now and tell it to sort of fine tune what I'm looking at. What's wrong with that? I mean, in a sense, taking versus editing is just an artifact of old technology because it was impossible to do them simultaneously or interactively with the existing technology.
Well, it's wrong if you believe that photography is a relationship between the photographer and the subject of the person who's being photographed. So there's a relationship of trust that needs to be built. And a connection. I mean, for my 1986 book, The Designing the User Interface, my challenge to the publisher was to pay for a portrait of me for the book by Yousuf Karsh, the famed Canadian portrait photographer who took the portraits of Churchill and many others. And so they agreed to that. And I went to his studio in New York City and had a wonderful hour with him, just the discussion and the relationship. And the photos he took of me were a product of the relationship. And so once you introduce another party into the room, such as a camera that you talk to, how clumsy that would be, how interfering with it. I mean, early on in the development of digital cameras, it was quite widely believed that you'd have to have a voice interface to the digital camera because there were so many controls and settings to be made. And that didn't prove to be true either. Even once the technology had matured, it's not the right application for voice. It just isn't. And so there are no, as far as I know, cameras that you talk to. I'm sure someone set one out.
No, I mean they don't exist. But I'm just I just feel like, wow, this is such an obvious thing to come. But let's see, right? If 10 years from now we're both alive, it'll be sort of interesting to look back and look at the trajectory of digital cameras and interfaces.
I'll be glad to make a bet over that. I think, the same high unrealistic expectations, you mentioned Siri or Alexa, which are fine, to say, what's the weather tonight? That's fine. Play Red Hot Chili Peppers, music, or Beethoven. Those are a few applications. But remember that Amazon believed that it would be the pathway towards e-commerce applications, that people would order products using voice, and they didn't. So that did not pan out. The failed expectations of voice, the talking to your car, the talking to your camera, and so on, there's billions of dollars of failed history. At the same time, you can point out the success. I mean, I'm impressed by voice recognition and technology. It did mature faster than I expected it would. So that's a win for those who believed in that. But the applications are more narrow than the advocates would have believed, because they, again, fall into Mumford's trap of the obstacle of animism. I have written about this in detail. There's reasons why the Air Force spent $25 billion over years on voice recognition in cockpits, and there is no voice recognition in cockpits because those fighter pilots have a joystick with a dozen controls on it that they can operate, and they can think more clearly. Speaking actually undermines your short-term and working memory. It consumes part of that. And so your problem solving degrades if you have to speak. It's not easy to speak, it turns out, Vasant. So if you're doing things that require great concentration, like you're a fighter pilot in a dogfight, you don't want to say, arm missile 3, ready, fire. You don't want to say that because you're too busy, saving a few milliseconds to save your life. And so there are deadly consequences to the mistaken belief in the widespread use of natural language. Again, compliments for the remarkable progress in voice recognition, compliments for the progress in question answering, but the success is a narrow one. So Siri and Alexa generally will steer you to a web page to get information.
And I feel like you're looking in the rearview mirror, Ben, but clearly I'm not going to change your mind. I'm more optimistic that future machines will continue to understand us better and integrate voice better with existing graphical interfaces.
Don't think so. Looking at my September 2000 paper in the Communication of the ACM, it's only 3 pages, called The Limits of Speech Recognition, where it focuses on why, again, my return to you is it's the human cognitive capabilities. So sharing your short-term and working memory by speaking, acoustic memory, acoustic speech grabs those short-term and working memory. So it reduces your capacity. So it's not easy to speak. That's the real limitation. This has been written on and studied quite generously in the last 25 years, but the AI world refuses to take in this fundamental issue and understanding. And so you do see returns to the zombie idea, which doesn't die, of bringing up human-like systems.
So what's your concern at the moment with the state of the art of AI? What bothers you about what you're seeing?
Again, let me say, startlingly impressive and alarmingly flawed. And the fact that, as many people write about Gary Marcus, maybe, and he's a good candidate for you to interview or have on your program, an NYU former professor as well. You probably know him. He's now here in Vancouver as well. But I think the unrealistic expectations and is a central thing. I think I encourage faculty and teachers to teach their students about ChatGPT, to learn to use it effectively, and professors should raise their expectations of what students can accomplish. An undergraduate term paper should be equivalent to what a master's thesis was 20 years ago, let's say. So we're seeing a lot more progress, and I think students will be made much more capable, and there'll be new possibilities, new forms of creativity. Just as, for me, as you know, I'm interested in photography, and in 1839, when Daguerre and others developed a camera. The French artists said famously, "From today, painting is dead." Well, it didn't die, but it transformed and grew into Impressionism, and new forms of painting emerged. And so we'll see, just as every technology gives us new opportunities, and it raises the expectations of what we should be able to accomplish. So those are the very positive things. I think the dangers are really there. And so I think we have to put guardrails and limits and understand where things go wrong, and people need to have more realistic expectations of what computers can do for them.
So you talked about impressive but flawed. So say more about what you see as the flaws, considering, of course, that one would expect flaws in pretty much any kind of technology at some stage of its evolution. So I'm not talking about flaws that will get fixed with, better concepts and engineering, but what do you see as sort of the major conceptual flaws in the field that bother you?
Well, I mean, the more technical flaw is the hallucinations, confabulations, lies, mistakes, errors that appear. So that means that, the ChatGPT and the generative AI tools can be used to generate and use things that are lightweight, maybe, and can be human checked, but you won't see these kind of AI tools in the cockpit anytime soon. 98% accuracy is just not enough for life-critical applications in aviation and medicine and so on. So we will have limitations. And I think the flaw is the assumption that humans will be replaced by machines. Geoffrey Hinton, memorably in 2016, said it's perfectly clear that, we should stop training radiologists because AI will be better at reading mammograms. He had poor understanding of what radiologists really did. And here, where are we, 8 or 9 years later, radiologists are flourishing, using AI very effectively. And as Steve Law wrote in the New York Times a few months ago, he visited Mayo Clinic, and they have dozens of applications of AI, but it's always as a tool to support the physician. And just as every tool, from the stethoscope to the electrocardiogram, help physicians make better diagnoses, I see every possibility that AI tools will help physicians of many kinds make better diagnoses. However, the physicians will integrate the proper cautions, deal with the edge cases, the unlimited number of edge cases. I think, one of my physician friends memorably described his career as, he said, the remarkable frequency of infrequent cases.
Reminds
yes.
me of Nassim Taleb and his fat tails.
Yes.
But, Ben, I guess just to be fair, right? Humans make mistakes too. Humans hallucinate too, right? So, but we forgive them, right? Because we're just human, right? So we say, well, humans make mistakes, they hallucinate, but that's okay, right? We're intelligent and make mistakes all the time, especially when dealing with complex problems. Isn't it unreasonable to expect machines to be perfect?
Yeah, well, of course, I have trouble with the words intelligent machine as well. Jaron Lanier wrote in New Yorker about there is no AI. So that's an even stronger position. I would say there's no I in AI. Is my position. There you shouldn't pretend to be human. So there's a real difference a difference between people and machines.
So you're saying that intelligence is fundamentally human?
Yes, that's right.
And so are you saying that intelligence requires biology?
Yes, it requires a body and emotions and so on. I make the strong line that says intelligence is only human. I mean, we could deal with cases of animals and so on. It's another issue.
Sure. I'm sure you'd say animals are intelligent as well, right?
It's a different kind of animals. There's a range of those as well. So we could deal with those problems. There's also difficulties in dealing with humans who have various disabilities and limitations or brain damage. There's a whole range of those edge cases that give us concern.
Ben, I mean, I think that's totally fair. You know, I mean, I had a great conversation with Anil, who's a neuroscientist and a cognitive scientist, and he's a scholar of consciousness. I had a great chat with him a few months ago, and his position, I guess, boils down to that, biology really matters, right? That our brain is constantly communicating with the rest of our body. It's just getting these signals and it's doing stuff, all the time. And that's what makes us conscious of our bodies or of ourselves. And so, consciousness is sort of, tied to biology. Now, that's I can totally buy that. But why do you sort of go so far as to say that intelligence also requires biology? That is, I'm separating consciousness from intelligence, and I'm saying intelligence seems like a lower bar to me, right? That you can be intelligent without necessarily being conscious.
Yeah, well, we have all these other words of conscious, sentient, knowledgeable, wise, intelligent, okay, logical. We could go down to, if you're can a machine be logical but not intelligent? Well, these are other nuances we can spend our philosophical time after midnight, after a few beers. Vasant, we could discuss at length.
I look forward to that. Yeah.
But I think, for me, it's just very helpful in clarifying the design principles if I keep the categories of machines different from the categories of people. And just understand that the long-term design of machines is not guiding it towards human abilities, but towards, I would say, remarkable capabilities. I mean, machines can invert 100,000 by 1,000 matrices in a way that I could never do. So I need tools like that to do the remarkable things that we need to do these days, and the enormous amount of data we need to process. We need powerful machines. And so I'm all in favor of using the power of machines. Joe Weizenbaum wrote Computer Power, Human Reasoning, or Human Judgment, maybe it was. So judgment, reasoning, these are the things. So I just happy to remember that people are different from machines, and I wish to celebrate the remarkable capabilities of people. So you track back to the issue that people make mistakes, but so do machines. People work in a very different way than machines. When people are doing things, making decisions, they're in a context of use. There are other humans around. They're connected with people in general. And so it's a very different experience than the machines approach. So I'm all in favor of building machines that are like machines and reminding us of the remarkable capabilities of humans and the trust we have among people and the way that people are just super capable at doing certain things. So if we return to the very practical things, I think the discussion gets focused. If we want to design, airplanes, then what is the role we might consider for using technologies? And so, there's degrees of autonomy in the jet engine. Every 10 milliseconds, the temperature is sensed and airflow is adjusted and fuel flow is adjusted, et cetera, et cetera. These happen automatically by machines, but they're monitored by the pilots who operate on the scale of minutes and hours, seconds, minutes, and hours. And so they have another set of decisions to make. And then the ground controllers have yet another, and then the et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole layers of human context here that have successfully made safe civil aviation. And so that's a great success story of the technologies. And the automation of it has dangers.
So Tim Wu makes this, where he says that the wholesale replacement of human work makes for good science fiction, but a bad future. And so he argues that we have a choice over the future that we produce. So what I want to ask you is, do we still have that choice, or is the horse already out of the barn? And I guess it's a two-part question. What kinds of choices are we talking about? Are these technological choices, or are they legal choices that we have in how we steer AI?
I like that you're quoting Tim Wu, who's written wonderfully about this. He really is a sensible, wise guide for these times as well. And yes, he and I agree that there are choices to be made. It's not inevitable. The inevitability is a fantasy in the minds of some in the AI world. It's not inevitable. I have seen how technologies get shaped and changed by things that we have done. I mean, one of my contributions was the idea of the link, that certain words are highlighted and you click on them to go there. That was our work in the mid 1980s. It's a small thing, instead of typing a number or a command, you directly manipulate, you click on the word, and the word indicates it's clickable, it's selectable by being highlighted in a different color. We chose light blue because blue worked on white backgrounds and on black backgrounds, and we tested it. Red was also a good color to use, but people could find the links, but when they read the text, their memory for the text content was degraded. And so it was blue. So that's the source of the blue links. And that idea picked up, we were building them into systems, hypertext systems on single machines. And Tim Berners-Lee in 1989, the Spring Manifesto, takes that idea, cites our work, and he elevates it to on the web. And look what happens. You get this huge explosion of successful applications, and you get all the knowledge and information that you want to have access to, and you get the communications, and you get e-commerce. These are huge payoffs from these ideas. And so I think I have seen the way these things transform. I've seen also how the touchscreen ideas from academic implementations such as our own spread and become the centerpiece of Steve Jobs' 2007 announcement of the iPhone and its enormous success story. So remember, the touchscreens weren't always there. They're mobile devices that were preceded touchscreen applications. And so the touchscreens that we showed guided the way. So I see the capacity to influence what's happening. I'm doing my part to I write this newsletter on human-centered AI that goes to about 4,000 people. And so that's my way of trying to influence the community to recognize its responsibilities towards directing the future and the fact that we do have choices to make at every point. So
what's wrong with what's wrong with the current interfaces, right? Because you've been critical about like the current interfaces that these LLMs have, right? That it's too open-ended. You're giving people a box to type in. If you were to design an LLM interface, what would that look like?
Yeah, I've written about that too. I think, the idea that we can build on from Amazon's success story. If you type, Amazon starts you with an open-ended natural language interface where you type blue jeans, okay? Or I want blue jeans, you can say. And so you'll get 20 pictures of blue jeans that are popular candidates. And then you'll get a faceted menu along the left-hand side that will say $20 to $50, $50 to $100. It'll say blue, yellow, green, orange. And you suddenly think, oh, I said blue jeans, but maybe black jeans would be nice. And then it asks you questions of things you didn't think about, zippers or buttons, and, bell bottoms, straight legs, narrow legs. The faceted menus, which were developed in our work for NASA under the term query previews in the mid-90s, really made a big effect, and they are the valuable source for Amazon, which has no chatbots and no natural language interface. It wisely starts with an open-ended box and then goes to faceted menus. So I would say, the ChatGPT and other Copilot, Gemini, etc., Claude, would benefit users. Instead of just having an open-ended box, it might give you a few more cues to the semantics of prompt formation. And there are 25 styles academic style, bulleted lists, playful, humorous, etc. There are many different styles of writing that you can invoke, and there are tones that you could invoke as well. There's different lengths and different things, in the style of Ernest Hemingway, in the style of Vasant Dar,
But Ben, I mean, don't we need both of these things, right? Which is what I was saying earlier, right? I mean, to me, like, there's a convergence going on. Sometimes the context is too nuanced to envision a priori, in which case it may be a lot more useful just to tell the machine what you want, assuming, of course, that the LLM understands what you mean, which is increasingly the case. So, I don't know, I'd expect the use of LLMs to proliferate in parallel with direct manipulation interfaces.
Oh, yes, there are certain situations it works quite well. And again, I'm very impressed by its production. Summarize this document as a common and effective kind of process. I guess startlingly impressive. It's definitely impressive. And yes, you ask a legitimate question: how far will its use spread? I think once you get past the fantasy and start looking at this as a designer, as an engineer, as an implementer, you come to appreciate the power of user interfaces, well-designed user interfaces that guide people through the process. They provide the cues for the semantics of prompt formation, that by giving people these choices, you're letting them know. That's why menus are so successful and so widely used. And they're pitifully few. Why do bank machines and all these other applications, you're pushing up against a wave that's going to swamp you, Vasant. Turn around.
Look, I mean,
run.
No, look, your point is well taken. Before we started, I was talking to my podcast producer who was mentioning that, one of these LLMs is driving him crazy, right? He's got to express himself exactly with the right prompt to get it to do what he wants it to do. So there's certain things where it's just much easier to do it, directly, via a structured interface.
One designer I spoke to said very succinctly, generative AI is great, but I can never get it to do what I want. If you have a clear intent of what you want, it's not always possible to do that easily with that.
Sure. Yeah. And in fact, one of my programmers tells me that it takes him longer to write a program with AI as opposed to writing it by himself.
That was a recent study. There was a study by a company which...
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
METR, metric or meter, whatever it is. But they found, actually, while the programmers believed that AI sped their programming by 20%, these were experienced programmers. The reality was it slowed them by 20%. There's a lot of a fantasy, illusion, wishful thinking, and religious fanaticism.
So, Ben, before we wrap up, what do you think of RLHF, the reinforcement learning human feedback, which LLM designers impose on top of LLMs to get them to generate socially acceptable responses? I mean, I realize this layer is necessary, but it appears incredibly biased to me in the sense that it reflects the sensibility of some arbitrarily chosen group of enforcers around the world selected by the AI companies. What do you think?
The central result of bad design is user frustration because they can't get what they want. And there you are. And so it takes a lot of hard work to study the way users are working. Who are the users? What are the tasks? There are different segments of the user population. There are different tasks. There's a great difference between the first-time user, the occasional user, and the everyday, familiar user. So, Photoshop becomes great for the experienced, frequent user, but it becomes a bewildering set of options for the novice and the first-time user. So you then find, you need design of much more restricted approaches. Photoshop Elements or other restricted versions enable novices to get going. And so you need the discoverability of features is a vital part for novices and beginners. But the shortcuts, which are hidden for the experts, become a vital part for them. And so if you design for different, if you make a design for one community of users, but it's used by a different community, they'll have frustration. So the frustration of confusion, of menus, of not finding what they want is there. The good designers, study the users and study the failures they have and then make constant improvements. And so there is a user experience design process that's been well established over the last 40 years. And I think it's led to many great successes. And, not perfect. There are flawed interfaces. Now, another important flaw that I have written about is mistakes that physicians might make. There are about 1 in 1,000 wrong patient errors that a physician assigns either a treatment or a lab test or a medication to the wrong patient. And we studied the ways these happen. They're rare events, and so they're difficult to study and simulate. And yet we found a set of principles which would help eliminate those, or reduce, I shouldn't say eliminate, but reduce the frequency of wrong patient errors. So it's not a matter of just high-level thinking, but it's a matter of hard work of studying real users, making real decisions in the proper context. So the steady progress, it continues. The HCI world is a success story. I mentioned 5,000 people attending the conference and thousands of papers, tens of thousands of papers published per year. It's a smaller field than the current, infatuation with AI. And there is great progress from AI. So bravo to those who have produced that progress. I hope they would more regularly, as they move towards products, and away from just basic research, as they move towards products, I hope they will integrate the success stories of user experience design.
What do you think of RLHF, the reinforcement learning human feedback that people have sort of put on top of large language models? And this is sort of, I guess, one of the dirty little secrets of AI. Like it's rarely discussed, but ultimately that's what produces sort of the responses that we see, isn't it?
I should know more. I'd like to know more about this, but you mentioned the downside effects, and people worry that it puts people in Nigeria or India under duress and has them doing terrible things at low pay. So that's kind of one story, which I have not investigated on my own. The idea of providing feedback is a good thing. That's what user experience design is all about. And so by having humans tag photos or choose imagery, that can improve the performance of the machine learning algorithms. Jessica Holman makes a wise suggestion that machine learning is a bad term. We should call it machine guessing. And that deflates what's going on. It's machine guessing. And we have to understand, again, when you say machine learning, it has this sense of inevitability and remarkable capabilities, but it's just machine guessing.
I can't imagine a discipline called machine guessing.
Yeah, right. It somehow deflates the fanaticism. Anyway, again, bravos for the accomplishments of AI, but I think healthy awareness of user experience design as you convert from research to products would do much to accelerate the good applications of AI.
Indeed. Well said, Ben. Well, on that note, I want to thank you for a wonderful conversation, Ben. I've really enjoyed myself. I always enjoy talking to you, and I always enjoy it when you tell me I'm wrong.
It's great fun. You have a wonderful belief in the unlimited possibilities of the future, and I hope I have wisely guided you to some of the limitations. Yes, okay, thanks.
The world belongs to the optimists, as one of my former colleagues used to say. We will continue to disagree on some things, but it's always a learning experience disagreeing with you, Ben.
Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you well and look forward to future discussions.
Indeed, yeah. And look forward to a beer in person when you're in the city next. That's
Sure.
more likely than me being in Vancouver anytime soon. So.
Okay. You should come here. The weather's lovely.
I will. I've heard wonderful things. I've never been to Vancouver. I've been to Victoria, but not to Vancouver.
Well, the AI conferences often come here. ICML was here last couple of weeks ago, and SIGGRAPH is coming, but often the NeurIPS and other conferences.
Indeed, yeah, it is on my list.
Let's have that beer.
Let's do that. Ben, thanks again. Wonderful to see you and chat with you.